pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Durkin?
Here.
Mr. Ruska? Mr. Jacobs?
Here.
Ms. Sierra?
Here.
Ms. Towner?
Here.
Ms. Bayless?
Here.
Mr. Smith?
Here. Billy. All right. Recognitions. This month.
We do not have any recognitions this month. We will have 2 teachers present at the December meeting. We're going to send out that invitation, and then we'll have some of our fall athletes that won awards at the December meeting.
All right. Jump right to reports. The Student Association report. There they are.
Student Association, before you leave tonight, when you're done with your report, let me know, and then I need to do one other thing, okay?
Awesome.
So don't leave, just let me know when you're done.
Sounds good.
So last week on Wednesday, we had our annual blood drive. We do one in November and then another one in February.
Yeah.
So we were able to get 85 donations, which saves 255 lives, which is pretty nice. So that was a nice turnout. And then we also had our Veterans Day Assembly yesterday, and it was a big success. A lot of the veterans were super happy with it. We had our band and orchestra and choirs perform, as well as we collected candy for the troops. We were able to get about 100 pounds, which is really nice. We're sending it to CSO, who will spread it to a bunch of different bases. We're not quite sure where. And we're also doing cards for the troops. And throughout lunches this week, people are making holiday cards that we will send overseas so that soldiers can get a Christmas card or holiday card.
And then also we had on Halloween we had our Spirit Day for October, which was really successful. We had multiple 100% from classes from the 5th hours, including my 5th hour, just, you know, naturally. But then we also had like high 90s, high 80s, a lot of great participation from that, and everyone followed the rules, thankfully. And then our next upcoming Spirit Day is going to be on November 20th. It's 2 weeks from tomorrow, or a week from tomorrow. And that's Pack the Place. It's a Best Buddies event where I'm sure you guys all know, but we, like the Best Buddies is a special needs basketball team plays against LT, and we do like a Pack the Place like we would for like a football game. And we're going to do a blue and white Spirit Day during that day to encourage people to go to the event at 6 p.m. that night. And then we're going to have an ugly sweater, holiday sweater, day in December.
So it's always my favorite. So yeah. Another thing to add to the Veterans Day, I thought this was really cool. My veteran, he graduated from RBA in 1960. There was one that also graduated the same year who did the speech. But I was walking him down to the alumni lounge where like the food and everything was at the end, and he was like just telling me how different it was. And then he's like, "Oh wait, this wall was still here though." It was kind of cool just to see like he remembered like the wall. And so I thought that was like a cool thing.
It was the same kind of breakfast with.
Yeah, and it was like really successful again like this year. Like it always is. It's always really fun. Also, we have a lot going on right now. We have the Thanksgiving baskets, which is we donate. Well, each class will like say like, oh, if they want to do it or not. We have 20 classes that signed up, and they each make like a Thanksgiving basket. So that will donate to CSS, which we do every year, and they just do anything with a Thanksgiving basket. So it'll be like gravy, stuffing, mashed potatoes, and then they can donate like $10-15 so we can get a turkey and stuff like that. And then all of them are due next week Tuesday, and then we just go and make sure everything's not expired, and then put them into like baskets. And usually we end up doing we end up having a lot more baskets than we signed up for, which is great. And then another thing we're doing is Santa Anonymous, and that's when we actually have 25 people that we're getting gifts for, and basically they're for people with special needs, and they could be any age. It could be little kids to adults, and they just have like what they just like tell us like what they want. So it could be anywhere from like toys to like gloves or hats or anything like that. And we have so last year we only had 14 people, but we were given 25, which is really cool. And we have a lot of classes that signed up, so everyone will get one this year, which is really cool. and then we'll wrap them and send them all again to CSS. And then lastly, we have the coat and blanket drive, and that is pretty self-explanatory. We're collecting coats and blankets, and then we do like scarves, hats, everything like that. We will have a mural up soon, but it's not up yet. And we're giving it to the Christ Church in Oak Brook, and and it's really cool because they already have like a food drive too and coat and blankets. So when we drop it off, it's so cool to see. Yeah.
It's super busy every time we go there. Like
Yeah.
we look around, there's like hundreds of people in church.
Yeah, so that's pretty much what's going on now. And in case you guys don't see you again, we're going to the Ronald McDonald House to bake cookies during finals week like we usually do, which is always really fun. So yeah.
That's really busy.
Yeah. Always keep
Is that
going.
everything?
Yes.
Does the board have any questions for SA?
No, we appreciate everything.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So before you,
I was just gonna say, it was really impressive watching you all carry the boxes up yesterday during the assembly. That was
Yeah.
a very good visual for
Yeah.
everyone, right? So.
Yeah.
so before you leave, we have a parent here tonight who contacted me and the board and wanted to personally thank you for helping out their student and bringing recognition to a terrible disease. And if Amy could come forward real quick.
So yeah, I just wanted to publicly appreciate what the Student Association has done for our family. My husband and I have 3 children. We have a 4th grader and a 9th grader and a 10th grader here at RB. The 9th grader has a condition called myalgic encephalomyelitis, also known by the trivial name of chronic fatigue syndrome. She's been homebound since 4th grade and bedbound now for 1.5 years. So she is a student here at RB, and it was really special that during homecoming week that the Student Association focused their fundraising and their efforts on her condition, that they were not only showering her with attention, they were also donating the funds to Open Medicine, which is a research site that's in San Francisco, and they're doing all of their research only on myalgic encephalomyelitis. And what was a great timing was that the $700 that the students raised was actually tripled by an anonymous donation from Open Medicine. So that money that you gave to the Open Medicine directly made even a huger impact. So every little bit counts, and we really appreciate all that you guys did. And a group of students came out to our home to see our daughter. They showered her with RB swag.
A lot of footballs.
A lot of t-shirts, and it was really special. And then they also gave her a year subscription to Audible. Another great treat that they gave her was they put a postcard, or a big, huge sheet of paper out that all of the students could write book recommendations, because my daughter is very big into audiobooks, and she's just kind of running out of ideas for topics and books. And so they gave pretty much all of the RB ideas for books. So I just wanted to give the Student Association a formal appreciation I'm part of a grassroots organization called ME Action, and we're just trying to get advocacy for her condition. So thank you very much, and I appreciate. Also, there was a teacher here at RB that I also wanted to give attention to, Mr. Fry. He is the first teacher in pretty much the world to add ME as a disease in his health curriculum. And his class is pretty much pre-med. It's a 10th grade health class, and my son actually is in his class. And so when we were sitting at parent night, my wheels were turning about how he needed to get this into his curriculum. And he said, absolutely, give me the information, I will do the research. And he added it to his curriculum. He taught the kids about it, and now all of the 10th grade health students know about ME. But I just want to acknowledge, he's not here tonight, but I wanted to acknowledge him also with a certificate that he is pretty much the only person in high school education to have ME in the curriculum. So I'm really proud, and we're really honored to have that here at RB. So
Thank you for coming forward, Amy.
you.
I say nice job. Amy, I can give him that certificate if you want.
Get up here.
Okay. Yeah.
Is that everything? See, I mean, good job, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for your, the other members of your association.
Thank you so much.
Make sure you tell them thank you as well for
Yeah,
missing.
we will.
Thank
See
you.
later. Have a nice day.
All right. All right. Okay, the President's report. We met with the RBEA this evening at a round table. I thought it was very productive and it was great in preparing for strategic planning. I think it was very, thank you for the RBEA for joining. Superintendent's report.
Curriculum advisory, no updates. Facilities advisory, no updates since the last update I provided in October. Finance met last week. We discussed the levy, staffing, enrollment projections, and Kristen will be providing the projected levy tonight, as well as staffing projections for next year and enrollment projections. Personnel Advisory Council, no update. Policy Advisory Council, we just received a new Press Plus packet from the School Board Association yesterday afternoon. So I will try to pull that advisory council together before the December board meeting. A purchase or lease of land advisory council, there's a meeting coming up with the zoo and the county forest preserve, so I will update the board accordingly. And communication audit, I have no additional information. I put some additional follow-up the board requested in my last Friday update. And I did receive that quote I was waiting on, and that is approximately $7,000 per mailing.
All right. Good.
That's all I have.
All right. Principal's report.
Good evening, honorable board members of District 208. Here's the principal's report and updates on how we are winning every week here at RB. Yesterday, we continued our proud tradition of honoring the veterans on November 11th, Veterans Day. We catered a breakfast for the veterans, held an assembly in the main gym with moving speeches, military songs, and acknowledgement of all the branches. Lastly, the veterans were also invited to speak to students during class visits. I would like to give a special thanks to Erin Cunningham, social studies teachers, and the lead organizer for this event. Furthermore, the RB Theater Department, along with hundreds of students, put on a magnificent 4-day performance of the fall play, Peter and the Starcatcher. They had 2 casts, an impressive set that resembled an authentic pirate ship. They had several months of practice. The young men and women did an outstanding job. I called the RB Auditorium for those 4 days, Broadway here on Riverside. I would like to thank everyone that attended, all the parents, administrators, teachers, and family members. What is more, the boys and girls cross-country team participated in the IHSA state finals at Detweiler Park in Peoria, Illinois. Almost all the runners met and exceeded their personal record. They did an outstanding job. Very proud of all the coaches and all the athletes. Just last week, the honor roll for Term 1, First Quarter 1 for the 2019-2020 school year was released, and it included 1,178 students, or 71% of the student enrollment. Of the 1,178 honor roll students, there were 271 seniors, 298 juniors, 283 sophomores, and 326 freshmen. To qualify for the A honor roll, students must have earned a 4.0 GPA or above. To qualify for the B honor roll, students must have earned between a 3.0 and a 3.9 GPA. I would like to congratulate all those students for earning high marks, and also the parents and teachers who supported the students in this fantastic achievement. We continue to engage the community through targeted events. Tomorrow, Wednesday, November 13th, from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m., we'll be hosting a community safety forum. It will be attended by the Chief of Police of Brookfield and Riverside, by our Superintendent, myself, the Assistant Principal. The entire community is welcome. Learn about how current issues facing in schools, at home, and how you could be part of the solution. We will also continue with the Coffee with the Principal, which is an opportunity for parents to talk to me directly about what's happening here at RB. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, November 21st from 9 to 10 a.m. And our December meeting will be Monday, December 16th from 9 to 10 a.m. The community and parents are welcome. Winter season has begun. Come and support the boys and girls basketball team, wrestling team, gymnastics, boys swimming, cheerleading, and clubs like chess and robotics, which enter the competitive season. We will also have at the end of November the Repertory Dance Ensemble concert on Thursday, November 21st, and Friday, November 22nd, starting at 7 p.m. Come see the fantastic dancers of RB. And lastly, Thanksgiving break holiday will begin Wednesday, November 27th, and run through Friday, November 29th. Happy gatherings and holidays to all.
Thank you, Hector. I think the touch on the community forum, I think that's an important piece for the audience watching and even for the board if they would like to attend tomorrow. Dave Mannon, the assistant principal, put this together with Lane Neiman, our school safety liaison. As Hector stated, myself, Hector, Chief Weitzel, Chief Petrick from Brookfield will be there just to kind of talk about the trending issues of safety and security in schools, and even some of the issues with vaping, as well as some of the issues with social media. And as parents, I feel like every 2 weeks we're sending out some type of notification, like something happened on Snapchat or something happened on Instagram. So we're looking to address that tomorrow in a more of a direct manner with both the police chiefs and the school administration. So for those of you watching, I would encourage you to come out if you have some time tomorrow at 6:30 in the auditorium.
Can I just say I went to the play on Saturday? It was phenomenal. I had never been to a play at RB before. I was like blown away by the talent of the students. It was so crazy good. And I would just like to thank Ms. Sarah Johnson for inviting me.
Yeah.
It was fantastic.
I was there on Friday. It was stunning. Just how the kids memorized these lines, and everything was flawless. And
I think as Hector
they
mentioned,
worked very hard.
I was there on Friday as well, but I think as Hector mentioned, I think they dual casted
Yeah.
the play, so I mean that increased our engagement numbers to get more students involved, and so that was a great job as well.
Very well done.
Assistant Superintendent's report.
All right, well, I have a lot to report out on tonight, so bear with me.
Kylie's not here, so Kristen's taking over.
So the report tonight will begin by providing financial information for the month of October. This represents a third of the fiscal year. So on board book page 6, there's a monthly summary report. The total revenue for the month was $531,869, with 40% coming from real estate taxes and CPPRT, or corporate personal property replacement tax. 27% came from evidence-based funding, which is our state funding, and 24% came from federal reimbursement, specifically IDEA, which is related to special education, and Perkins. The total expenditures for the month were $1,835,832, with 80% of those expenditures going towards salary and benefits and 6% towards capital projects. We did have some reimbursements in both revenue and expenditure, so I excluded that from the graphical representation to try to simplify things a little bit. When you're looking at the revenue, where you'll see the local revenue, why that was negative is because we transferred some fees out to primarily our activity accounts for testing, AP testing, as well as yearbook and activity fees. And for expenditures, there was a credit from LADSI and purchase services, which I'll go over in just a minute.
So, quick question, just to understand and for the people watching at home. This is available on the board book online. This is a public document, correct?
It becomes a public document when we post the minutes, yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that. 'Cause I think you have a nice, I think the pie chart that's been added kind of explains things in a nice fashion, and some of the accompanying slides support some of the information here.
Thank you.
Sorry to get
That's
you
okay.
Your rhythm there.
On board book page 7 begins our monthly financial statements, and on page 7 you can see the current fund balance for our operating funds is roughly $17.7 million. And this does include the $2.9 million that is earmarked for the field project in working cash. So excluding that money, we have a balance of roughly $14.8 million. And in my opinion, this balance is critical as we don't really receive a large revenue source again until March when we receive the next wave of property tax. So it's important that we have this surplus to help cover our expenditures in the meantime.
But our fund balance is 17 now.
And
So
then,
that will go down again in at the end of November, as we use some of that money to pay off the bills, and then it will go back up in March when we start to receive taxes.
yeah,
Is that
it'll
correct?
continue to go down November, December, January, February, correct. And that includes the money that's earmarked for the field project as well.
And our March revenue tends to be lower, right? Because the second tax installment is smaller. Right,
Is it
so-
the 55-45, right? Like, is it?
I don't know the exact,
Yeah, something like that.
Roughly, yeah.
Something like
So
that.
Kristen, like roughly, if all of our revenue is received that we're projecting through our levy and tax collection and state payments, we roughly have about $15 million in the bank.
Correct.
Okay.
And it's also important to note that you need to exclude, or you should exclude the $6.5 million in debt service and life safety accounts because those are for very specific purposes, and that's why they're not included in the operating fund category. So moving on page 8, the summary of revenues shows that the district has received 43% of our revenue for the year, and this amount is very equivalent to last fiscal year at this time, which was 44%. On page 9, there's a summary of expenditures, which shows that the district has spent 32% of the budgeted expenditures for this year. Given that we're a third of the way through the fiscal year, we're right on track, and we're very similar to last fiscal year at this time. On board book page 10, the statement of revenues and expenditures report is there for the month of October. And this report lists all of our revenue and expenditure accounts and then provides a summary of the expenditures or revenues for the month, as well as compares budget to actual. So there are 2 questions submitted regarding this report. The first is on page 15 of board book. There's a question about summer school expenses, which is towards the top quarter of the page. And we are still paying them out, and that is because there was a summer camp and the athletic trainers that were overlooked and were not paid out for their summer time. So we are paying them out. This account is used for summer athletics and summer school. We inherited the account name, and it's on my list to change for next year, so it is more accurate of what we're using that account for. And then also on board book page 17, on the bottom of the page, this was there was a question submitted about the purchase service with LADSI. LADSI is our special education cooperative, and this summer LADSI, like they do every summer, but LADSI requested their member districts pay their invoice in full for the year. And so we did. The problem was us, along with many schools, didn't have their IDEA grant approved yet. And so you can't spend some of your grant funds until your grant is approved. So what LADSI had to do was issue refunds to all of the member districts for just the portion of which grant funds were expended. And so that's our refund, and then next month we're going to pay that back to LADSI. So it's kind of just a formality with a lot of extra paperwork. But that's why there's a big credit.
So are they going to do that again next year? Ask for payment in full, or do we have some wiggle room here?
We'll have some wiggle room. Part of the problem was this was the first year the state rolled out the consolidated district plan, which was a new grant application that was trying to consolidate things, but it kind of complicated things at the state level because you had to have multiple people review it and everyone was submitting it at the same time, and there was kind of a backlog. So hopefully kinks will be worked out on both ends.
Superintendents from each district that are part of LADSI Cooperative sit on directing board, so that was something we discussed, like, you know, it's cleaner than if we submitted in August or September our bill before, instead of having to do it this way. So there was some discussion on that, and there will be some flexibility established.
Just another example of how the state is just right on top of everything.
And then finally, in this portion of my report, the student activity account summary, which I always report out on for the month of October. It begins on board book page 21. Just as a reminder, negative account balances represent positive fund balances, so it's the reverse for the activity accounts. And then I wanted to call your attention The testing account 6010 increased by roughly $123,000 this month, and that was where the local funds primarily were transferred into this account. In May and June, we'll pay a huge bill to College Board for all of the AP tests. Each test is $95. So we'll pay that test fee, and then it also covers testing supplies and AP test proctors we pay out of this account. So this account balance is going to remain pretty large for the next several months until we get that big bill from College Board in May or June. Are there any questions before I go into the staffing and enrollment summary for projections? Okay. So the first part of this report begins on Board Book page 27, and it's an updated report on classes under 20 and over caps for the 2019-20 school year. The first chart in the report contains classes that had board approval in March to run under 20 students. Many of these classes are intervention classes, and as you can see, many of them, with the exception of Introduction to Heritage Speakers and German 1, remain under 20 currently. The next chart contains classes that are only offered 1 period a day that were over 20 in March, but under the course cap. And so I know we have some board members that are seeing this for the first time. So as you can see in the far right column, we have 3 different caps. We have a 25, 30, and a 40. And when we talk about the caps, we're always looking to get into the plus or minus 2 range. So a 25 cap, we're looking to get between 23 and 27. 30 would be 28 and 32, etc. So we are reporting out at anything that was initially more than 2 students below the cap. One thing I want to call to your attention on this report is Dance 3 was initially at 25 students, and we were scheduled to run it. And then over the summer, since it was only offered 1 period a day, there were several students that had a conflict and had to choose whether or not they wanted to take Dance 3 or something else that was only offered that same period. And we had several students choose not to take Dance 3. So we were sitting at 12 students in the class. So at that point, given the class cap is 30, we made a decision not to run that class for this year.
Now, could we have moved the class to a different period?
Not in the summer. At that point, it's too difficult to do because we have one dance teacher who's also already scheduled to teach other classes throughout the day. And usually we catch something like that in March where we run conflicts to see are there a bunch of kids that are going to conflict out. And I don't know why they didn't catch that this year, if there was a different glitch. But usually we look at that in March when we're scheduling the classes to avoid conflicts that would make a class not run like that.
Kids can also change their mind at different times, right? So it could have been a timing thing.
Correct.
I had one of these other really cool classes.
Also said,
in their opinion.
Yes.
Correct.
I
mean, there's obviously 12 kids wanted to do this class, and then it conflicts with another class. I mean,
also
some of these went way up too.
Correct. Also, several of the kids in Dance 3 were also in Dance 2. So they were still getting dance, and some of them had the ability, I believe, to also go to honors repertory dance if they had auditioned and gotten in. So there were other dance options for them.
So what happens to those 12 then? Were they?
So they
what
found
options did they have?
Another PE class to push into. And it depends on what was offered that period as to what their choices were. And then there's one more chart on this report on the back, or on the next page in Board Book, and this chart contains courses that were only offered 1 period a day that were over 2 students in March, and then where they're sitting at enrollment wise right now. And so some of those students, it depends on the class. Some of those students, for group fitness, they choose a different PE class. For choir, chamber choir, that dropped because our choir teacher, Aubrey Prince, probably just balanced out the choirs and shifted them to another choir. So each of these situations are a little different as to why the October enrollment is different than the March enrollment.
But half of those classes are music, looks like.
Correct.
So is it common for group fitness went from 56 to 40? 16 kids conflicted out, or?
Well, so this class is only offered 1 period a day, so instead of splitting that class and doing, 2 classes of 28, or 29, what would happen is, since the class cap is at 40, we would choose to run one section of it, and then some students would conflict out naturally, other students would have to choose a different PE class.
Is that like in the old college days, the last guy to sign up is the first guy out?
It depends on the class. If it's, I know sometimes we do with psychology, if all students can't get in, we'll give it to seniors first so that they have the opportunity to take it before they leave RB, and then let juniors take it the following year. So it depends on the particular course. Other questions on this one before we go to the next part of the report? Okay. So on board book page 29, this contains the final staffing summary for the 2019-20 school year. As you can see on the left part of the page on the bottom, we allocated 106.6 FTE staffing for this year, allotting 0.4 FTE for transfer students. We always reserve some FTE for transfer students in the event that we have transfer students show up in August and September. We sometimes get a late push right after Labor Day. We did not need to use that 0.4 this year, so we allocated 106.2. If you look on the right side of this paper, you can see the different class averages by department, as well as by the 3 different caps, the 30-1, the 25-1, and the 40-1, as well as the overall department average. Then on the bottom right, you can see we report out on the overall class average, including all of the different categories. And as you can see over the last 4 years, the class size average has dropped. This year it is 26.28. And then when you look at the overall class average without the 40-1s, so that's primarily PE classes, as well as some of our music classes, like choir and band and orchestra, that drops to 24.78. And then when you just look at the core classes of math, English, science, and social studies, the average class size is 24.3. And again, that's dropped consistently over the past 4 years as well. Are there any questions on this page?
It's dropped almost 1.5 kids from 1.5, right?
Mm-hmm.
Core classes from 25.8 to 24.3.
Since 16-17.
Mm-hmm.
So let me explain to the board the whole plus or minus 2. Like there's not an exact science to staffing or projections. And so, like, what the plus or minus 2 is I'm trying to give the administration to say, okay, classes that are non-core classes, so that are not a graduation requirement or class specifically for intervention or help and improve college readiness, those classes are 30-1. So, like our foreign language classes, a couple of our Kristen helped me here historically. Some of our other 30-1s besides foreign language would be.
We have some social studies, as well as some applied arts classes, a few fine arts classes. I believe I said social studies as well.
So those are like more elective-based classes, right? So the 30-1. So like what we're trying to say is like we shouldn't put more than the plus 2 would be 32. So we shouldn't put more than 32 kids in a class, and we should try to keep the class average no less than -2, so 28. So you're trying to kind of fit within that window if you're doing multiple sections to come up with an average. So you may have one, as a teacher, if you taught, have 3 classes, you may have one that's sitting at 31 and one that's sitting at 27, right? And so your average would be right around 30 or 29. I mean, so that's the whole idea of plus or minus 2, because there's no exact science to this. Like Kristen stated earlier, if you get 42 kids to sign up for a lab class and it's supposed to be 25-1, you got to run 2 sections, right? You can't go 42 kids in one class, or tell 17 kids they can't have that required lab class. So our labs are 25-1 plus or minus 2. So I think that relates a little bit to the discussion you heard a few weeks ago about there's some concern on with science labs, there's not enough stations to be at 27. So we have to review some of our science labs numbers where there's exactly enough stations and what that cap, might need to come down a little bit so that each of the lab stations have the access to the gases and some of that stuff. And then with the bigger classes, which is just strictly some of the band classes and the PE classes, is 40-1. So we're trying to come in between 42 and 38 when we're staffing those classes.
So Kevin, on like the science class, I can't visualize the room, but would a mobile station for the plus or for the +2, in the rare situation where you do have extra students, is there a mobile, kind of like a portable station that's a solution, or is the classroom just filled to capacity and that's not an option?
I think right now we have one station that doesn't have access to the gases, and so I'll talk with the instructional coach. We had talked about some other things. We did some modifications to another class 2 summers ago, and so we'll look at that, and if there's not enough stations, then we'll make sure that we run with enough stations. So we'll go to the next page. Kristen, is there any other questions on this page before we go on to the next page? We have to do enrollment next, correct? Okay, so Kristen's going to cover that piece, and I can circle back on the staffing a little later in the presentation.
Well, I just want to make sure I understand the process here, right? So kids enroll now, or they make their course selections. Then in a March timeframe, the board gets a memo or a discussion about classes that are below the 20 number, right? Sort of just a decision to run a class.
Yeah, so let me probably circle back. I should have did this introduction for some of the
I just want to kind of understand the chronology here and where this exactly fits in.
Tonight you'll see enrollment projections. And the only reason we're giving you staffing projections is just to prepare the board, since that's our largest expenditure. We're preparing you for the springtime when we start to develop the budget. Why we show you the historical is since we've been here and we had to, tighten up the finances and work our way out of deficit and some of those things. So we started to do this. So we just tried to report to show you, we're not telling you class numbers and one thing in the spring, and then all of a sudden when you get to the school year, those numbers are way off. The actual staffing and course selection process is kids will sign up for classes from now and through January. I think our 8th graders, incoming freshmen, are in January after the winter break. And so once all those students sign up on courses, we kind of use the staffing projections of the enrollment to say, okay, building administration, you have 106 or 105 teachers. Now, based on the interest that students have signed up for, you can spread that number out. And then what we do is with the board is we come to you in March with courses that are under 20, but the building administration feels need to still run some of our intervention classes, or maybe a capstone language class or an AP class that we have, a good amount of students signed up for, and it wouldn't be beneficial to cut that class. So one of the reasons the board sees that courses under 20 recommendation and has to approve that is when I came here in 11-12, my first year, and we had the large deficit, we had several courses that were operating well below 20, and you're paying, those are full-time teachers in there, and we had a couple courses that had 8, 10 students, and so when we were looking at, okay, how should we start to tighten up our finances, those were some of the first courses we looked. Like if the interest level wasn't there, or the number of students signing up wasn't there, the board should be the ones to determine whether or not they run. So that's why the board approved the policy of anything below 20 needed board approval in March.
But at that same time, the scrub has taken place about the 25, 30, 40. There's nothing contemplated in a March timeframe that's above the max +2 for any of these types of classes.
Correct, because we won't really know any
Okay.
summer transfers or anything, because residency is not till July. So if a kid's transferring from LT, the first time we see them is sometime in July or August.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have them accounted for.
So you could be at a 32 in a class that you would expect to be 30.
Correct.
Okay.
So if that kid came in and we could say we had 2 seats open in that class that's already staffed at 30, to possibly put that student in that class that can go up to 32.
Okay.
And the reason why March is an important month is because based on like the reduction in force laws in school code, we have to make a decision by the March board meeting. So if we were going to make a decision to cut some class or reduce the number of staff that we have on certified teachers, we would have to do a reduction in force in the month of March.
Right, by law, it's like 90 days.
So 60, yeah, it's a certain amount of school days before the end of the year that you have to give a teacher notice that you're, so that's why we start early in November, but there is a process where the students, when it comes to their electives, they will have first, second, and third choice. They have to put some other classes down because we know there are some conflicts that will come up when they're running 1 class or 2 class, or some things will happen where they may have to change. But that's why it's tied to the March date. Any other questions on some of the general stuff? I'm going to get into staffing here in a little bit once Kristen moves on with the projection part. Okay?
Okay, so on page 31, we have, on page 30, we have information from our feeder schools in regards to their enrollment from the 1920 school year. And then this information is used to create RB's enrollment projection for the 2021 school year, and then we provide a few years after that. So on page 31 is probably what you're most interested in. We have our projected enrollment for the 2021 school year. I've highlighted that in blue for you. Overall, we're projecting 1,683 students. This includes the 30 expected students that we will have in transition, and it also includes roughly 35 special education students who are outplaced and are accounted for among the freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior numbers. And so if you take all of those students out of the total, since they don't directly impact our FTE in the building, I'm projecting that we will have 1,618 students roughly attending RB next year. And so you can also see too, as we continue on in future years, we do expect a significant drop in our enrollment. In fiscal year 25, which is the 24-25 school year, we do anticipate the enrollment starting to hover around 1,600 and then dropping after that.
And this is all based on the enrollments of the feeder schools that you were given on the previous page.
Yes, correct. We use 90% of the prior year feeder enrollment in grades 2 through 8 to build out for the 2022 through 2026 school years. So those numbers certainly will change, right, because feeder schools will get more students that transfer in. And so every year I update those projections to try to get them to be more accurate as we get closer to those years.
So historically, we have been rather accurate within 5 to 10 students each year. This year, the projection was for 1,709, and we're at 1,666.
Correct, and part of the reason is, typically we have more freshman students transfer in from a variety of different feeder schools that we didn't get this year. So you can see the biggest class that we're off in is our freshman class for this year. Questions on this before we move on to staffing projections? Okay. So on the last page of this report begins on page 32. This is a chart that Dr. Skinkis began using 8 years ago to provide an estimate of the future staffing needs for the upcoming school year. If you look to the left, there's a yellow chart, and that includes required FTE. Those include positions such as instructional coaches, dean's office, counselors, social workers, things of that nature, that wouldn't necessarily be impacted by the number of students in a particular class. So that's why we pull that out. Then if you move to the center of the page, you'll see the first box is our current year. And so as Dr. Skinkis said, we were projected to have 1,709 students this year. Our current enrollment is 1,666 students, but then in-house students that are using our FTE is 1,611. And so that's a big jump because we were projecting there being 1,709, and so last year FTE was allocated assuming that we would have roughly 1,709 students, and obviously we're we're significantly lower than that. So then what we do is look at this year the number of students taking 3 to 5 classes. Don't be alarmed, most of those students are taking 5 classes. We may have like 1 or 2 students that have an exception that they're, for whatever reason, a health reason or something, that are only taking 3 to 4. Most of those students take 5 classes. So on average, we have 65 students this year that are taking 5 classes, which gives us 325 seats. And then 6 classes, we have roughly 581 students taking 6 classes and 957 students taking 7 classes. We use the overall class average of 27 because we're including all of our classes put together for the entire building. So the ones that are at 35 are 30, the ones that are at 25, and the ones that are at 40. And so that comes out to be, when you look at that FTE needed for those classes in addition to the required FTE, it comes out to be 104.6. Again, we initially had allocated 106.6. So based off of this chart and the formulas, it's demonstrating that we are overstaffed by 2.0 FTE, but keep in mind we didn't use 0.4 FTE, so that's really 1.6 FTE.
Before you go on to the option A, B, so let's take a minute to digest this. One teacher is one FTE is 5 classes. You see the box up in the upper right-hand corner, and so like when you look at Kristen's data, so roughly 2.4 FTE will cover the kids that take 3 to 5 classes, 25.8 for the kids that are taking 6 classes, and 49.6 for the kids that are taking 7 classes plus the required FTE. So even if, without flipping too crazy here back and forth, if you go back to the one sheet on the original, when Kristen started on page 27, now she said we didn't use our 0.4 for transfers. So really we're at 106.2. If you look at just the first chart of classes under 20, that's a 1.6 FTE right there. So that's the, on page 27, the first 8 classes that are listed. I mean, so there's 1.6 FTE that the board approved that didn't meet any of those class counts, but the administration had brought to the board a need to run. And then if you go to the next chart, debate, having only 14 students, so there's another 0.2, right? So you're already at kind of the 1.8. So it kind of gives you, the board, an idea of, although we used 106.2 teachers and we're saying we're overstaffed roughly by 2 teachers, it shows you where a lot of those sections went, is offering opportunities for our kids in classes that maybe traditionally wouldn't run or meet the caps.
Also included in the FTE is some support staff that does not have like a class list.
Yeah, that's
yes?
the whole yellow box, the 26.7.
How do you figure out
Oh, okay.
counselors
Sorry.
or social workers? How's that?
That's
Yes,
all.
I
That's
guess
all figured in
was-
the. That's all figured in the 26.7.
In the yellow box.
Right.
In the yellow
But-
box. So we have 5 counselors.
But that's not done by enrollment.
That's not, well,
So, how
we've
do you
tried to
get
keep it within 320,
for each counselor?
for each counselor. We tried not to go over 330. I think we're pushing our max with that, but the numbers have actually gone down in like this year. So we have to keep an eye on that. We have a retiree coming up. We'll have to see where our enrollment's at.
But social workers and special ed, right? There should be a
Social
formula behind
workers,
those.
yeah, social workers, the board made a decision to hire an additional 0.6 2 years ago because of all the, we provided a report to the board to show the number of students seeing social work, students being hospitalized, having issues, social emotional issues outside of school. So the board, we had Beth pull information on what would be the staffing we would need to address some of those issues. And that's how we added the 0.6. Special education, we just shifted to this process last year but we try to have all of our 8th grade, because we know the students that are going to be here next school year that will be sophomores, juniors, and seniors. So we had our special ed director try to complete all of the 8th grade transition meetings before the end of January, so we can have a better idea of what our special ed staffing would be to recover those needs. Instructional coaches is a contractual. We have 1 librarian. ELL is a course we're required to offer, and so usually that fluctuates between a 0.6 and a 0.5 every year. Credit recovery is for our students, so when you look at some of those students that are the 3 to 5, that's our credit recovery program, trying to get those students to graduate. Students that are maybe in their, it only take 4.5 years to get their diploma. Literacy coaches, we're helping with our building reading initiative, so those are certified staff members who go push into other academic courses and work with those teachers and student populations on reading strategies and reading interventions. And then this year we did an algebra academic support to strictly work with our lower performing students in our entry-level algebra classes and support algebra classes, so that they have a certified algebra teacher in their academic support working with them on tutoring and their assignments and homework and interventions. Dean's office is a 0.2, so next year that's 1 position that we'll eliminate, but we had a 0.2 this year as we have a dean that's retiring, and so we had a female teacher who has their administrative license do some work in the dean's office for 1 period a day. Also provided us a female dean. Instructional tech is Bridget Wilmot, and that's the teacher we have dedicated to working with our one-to-one initiative, supporting teachers with the technology initiatives with their Chromebooks, and also implementing the blended learning pilot for the 4 teachers this year. And then we saved the 0.4 roughly for transfers. And so what happens with us is that, as I stated earlier, when we do our enrollment, our registration process, any students moving into the district, we don't see them until July. So at that point, most of our staffing has to be decided in March because of the whole reduction in force. And so we try to at least say, hey, if we get a big influx of freshmen and we need to open another section of freshman English or another section of bio, something that is a required course, we have that flexibility built in there.
And as you can see, in August this year, because we had a deficit and we didn't have the number of transfers that we were necessarily anticipating, I did reduce the FTE in the budget to 106.4, but still kept that 0.2 because it was August, and we sometimes get transfers into September around Labor Day. You ready to move on to the 2 options?
Yeah, unless there's any questions. So we've had some historical times where we'll get a big influx of transfers, and so like we'll maybe have a staff, a part-time teacher in a department, and there's some room or there's flexibility within the master schedule to add a section, and we can do that the 1st or 2nd week of school. It just kind of all depends on what specific course, where those are scheduled throughout the master schedule, what type of conflicts those would create. So it's not that it hasn't happened in the past. It's kind of dependent on luck of the draw between the transfers and master schedule and staffing issues. So Kristen will give you 2 projections, and then these are, we'll lay down a little historical kind of what you can be prepared for as we begin to do the budgeting process in the springtime. We do not make any determination of where these FTE are assigned. We leave that to the building administration to kind of figure it out. We just are trying to establish the overall number of teachers that we need to employ next year based on these enrollment projections.
And the instructional coaches work with Kylie and
Beth.
And Beth
Right.
to put all that in place, right?
Correct. And then Hector will do a final review. Me, Hector, Kylie, Beth will do kind of a final review. And that's where we kind of talk about courses that are over 20 or under 20 that may need to go forward. If there's any kind of major conflict that they forgot about that we need to go over the cap, that's where we try to get that information now so that I can prepare the board in March like, hey, we told you it was gonna be 106.6. We had several students sign up for this capstone class, so it needs to be 106.8, you know, I mean, so there's time in here to communicate some things to the board. Okay, Kristen.
Okay, so we typically provide two options to the board to kind of just give some idea of where we'll be at for next year. So option A is maintaining the 27 class average and using our projected enrollment of 1620 along with our required FTE. We are projecting that to go down 0.2, as Dr. Skinka said. We won't need the 0.2 in the dean's office. We don't anticipate needing that. So that would give us a projected FTE total of 105.1 for next year, and that does include reserving the 0.4 for transfers if needed. And then traditionally, option B has been reporting out on class size averages at 27.5, and that would be an overall FTE of 103.7.
And so, I mean, we could sit here and run, you know, different scenarios each ways, but obviously, you know, by just changing that 0.5, it was like 1.4 FTE. And so if we went to an average of 26.5, that would increase that. So from 105.1 probably to 106.5 or 106.4 where we're at today. The other thing that I think is important is we spent a lot of time this year really focusing on the budget expenditures. And so right now we're slated to be at, you know, roughly a negative 400,000 deficit. So the reason we show you a couple of options in November is like if those numbers begin to come into fruition and the board wants to manage the deficit and change, this will give you an idea of the amount of staffing, either A, you can increase or decrease, and it's kind of budget impact. So that's the only reason why we give you a couple of different options.
Okay, don't we have kind of like a rule for our core classes?
So when in 2011-12, I didn't, obviously when you come, I started in July. So the first time I gave this report was in November of 2011 as we got prepared for my second year and some of the cuts that we were going to need to make. And so after, I think, my first 2 or 3 years, we started to make a commitment as we began to get on stable financial ground and having some surplus budgets and being balanced and beginning to build back up the fund balance. What we did is we made a commitment to go with the math, science, English, the required courses, core courses. We started with the freshman class of maybe 2016. And then and we focused on their core classes and trying to be at a 25-1 or 27-1 with the +2, right? And then every year we added. So right now, all 4 of our classes for whether it's freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior, the core classes like the required math, the required English, science, we try to stay within below the 30-1, more on the 27-1 class average.
So,
because there was a while where it was all 30-1.
right, so with this table, and we have the weighted kind of seats where everything's kind of lumped together, you know, and again, it's up to the board. I think it might be a little helpful to see almost 2 columns, you know, what are we looking at for an average for our core courses, and then an average for like non-core courses.
Well, I think you saw that on, if you go back to page 29, that's why we give this report now, so that once all this is shaken out, you can see on the bottom of page 29, we have that all broken out. So currently, our core classes of math, science, English, and social studies, our average class size is 24.3, and then it gives you the historical average for the last 3 years before that. Then for overall class average, this includes our band and PE classes that have a 40-1, or without the 40-1. So that's just more of our foreign language, some of our English electives, social studies electives. That's 24.7, and then our overall with everybody in there is 26.2. So if you ran my chart at 26.28, you know, with our current year, if we, instead of having 27 in that top colored chart, if you ran it at what our current average is, it would come out that we're staffed exactly where we should be at 106.2 or 106.4. I mean, so, but when we did the projection for the board, we used 27 to 1 last year in November, and we used based off of the 1709 minus the transition students, which is how we came up with the 106.6.
So is the .4 transfer, did I hear you right, is that still in the budget, or is that, you're waiting till after the Thanksgiving holiday to see if any additional transfers come in?
This year, we took out .2 in August.
So there still is .2 in
and there's
there.
still .2 in there. In my opinion, it wouldn't make sense to amend the budget just for that .2, and that's why we try to shave it off in the summer if we don't think that we're going to need it before we adopt the final budget.
But it also means we're going to see either salvage or something.
Correct.
Along those lines. And then on the special ed allocation, right, the 13.3, I know Kevin explained how that was, kind of came to be. How closely is that looked at in terms of adequacy, knowing the population we have moving into the district, knowing the individuals we cover, after graduation? What kind of deep dive can we get on the special education number, and is it too high, is it too low?
So
is it spot on?
So one thing that you don't see is in February, when Kylie and Beth sit down to do the staffing with the instructional coaches, there are 2 additional special education spreadsheets. One is strictly looking at co-teaching, and it looks at the number of students that need co-teaching in each of the courses that we offer co-teaching in, and then we determine based off of those numbers how many sections need to be co-taught. And that's so that we can try to stay under the 30% of students in that class that need co-teaching. That's in an ideal world. I can tell you that's not our current reality. But so we have that co-teaching spreadsheet where we look at all the co-teaching needs based off of student IEPs. Then we have another spreadsheet for special education, which is courses that are offered within the special education department. So that would be like our vocational class or our core classes. So if a student isn't able to push into a general education class, we have special education teachers that teach small section English classes or science classes. And so we look at those needs. Those needs stay rather consistent from year to year because if a student most likely has that need as a freshman, they most likely have that need all 4 years. We do sometimes are able to push a student out into a co-taught class, but usually that's pretty predictable. So we use those 2 spreadsheets to come up with the 13.3.
Okay.
So that's what happens behind the scenes for that number.
Is everybody familiar with what is co-teaching? Okay. So Sheila Jersis, the special ed director, is scheduled to speak to the Board of Education on December 10th, so we can have her go into a little more detail of what goes into her staffing allotment and her staffing process, the 8th grade transition process, and then I know the board wanted to hear a little bit more about the overall finances and the trends in special education at RB during her tenure. So I'll have her, I'll make sure those points are laid out and that she can talk to those at December 10th. So, long story short, I know we threw a lot of information at you. This will be available on the website to review. We should be around 105 teachers next year, give or take, 0.2, 0.4, something in that area.
Do all our teachers work a full schedule, a 1.0 FTE?
No.
Okay.
So, that number may be, 110 people equal that 105.1 or our current 106.2. Right? We have some departments where maybe they have 14.5 FTE, 14.8 or 10.2, right?
We probably have roughly 8 or 9 certified staff members that are part-time.
So with the certified staff members that are part-time, is that where we would get flexibility to fill different, like one section was higher than you expected, is that where you can pick up some flexibility?
Yeah, that would certainly be the easiest, trying to find a .2 science teacher in September to come in and teach for 50 minutes a day when they're not already tied to the building is not very realistic. It certainly can happen, but we haven't experienced much luck with finding a quality teacher for that particular situation. That also poses another challenge because let's say at that point you realize that class is, or all of the biology classes are full at 28. If you bring in a teacher to teach one period, you don't get to redistribute all of those biology classes among now that one extra section. It's just that one period gets alleviated because you can't really change all of these kids' schedules in September to try to balance things out at that point. So that's the other problem that it poses, is that you're really only solving that class size for that one period where you add that extra teacher.
And this is where, like, I'm sorry, Laura. This is where, just like the budget process, some of you had made comments in the past, like, why are we approving our budget in September when we've already been operating out of it for three months, right? June, July, August, and half of September. It's kind of the same thing. Like, so we do the staffing selections in January, course selection through January. We try to figure out the FTE count and get a number to the board. So if we have to reduce in force, or if we need to post and hire, we can do that in the spring. We have to let teachers know an idea of their master schedule and their assignment in May. And then we have registration in the summer where we might get an influx of students, or maybe this year you'll get an increase in juniors we weren't expecting. And so that's why we leave that .4 to try to do some shifting around to those sections. And we try to, when Beth builds the master schedule, she tries to build some flexibility in the core classes so that if we do get an influx of transfers, there can be some movement, but there's not a lot that can occur necessarily come August.
But if we get that anomaly, the one class that now is larger than expected, could anything be alleviated with some of our part-time certified staff co-teaching and some unique configuration of a course where you would now have 2 certified instructors during the same period, and you may be kind of swapping lecture and lab, kind of swapping out, almost overlapping the same space?
I think it would be probably more cost efficient if we added a teacher's aide in the emergency situation, if there's that. I think like the situation that was brought up about the chemistry is that at that point there's only so many stations, right? So either we got to look at how we're staffing those classes with the number of stations and if that needs to be reduced. But I think at some point adding another teacher, if there's not enough stations there, it's not, adding another teacher isn't going to remedy that problem, right?
Well, if you had somebody who was part-time and they added another .2 FTEs, and then if you were able to split the classroom where half are doing lecture and you could maybe use some room in the library or whatever and half are doing labs, and kind of swap that out in a situation that's an anomaly, I don't know if that might work for a one situation, and you're only picking up, a .2 FTE, but you're getting certified staffing.
Yeah, we have done that in the past, for example, with Western Civ, a few years ago. The challenge is we've certainly then alleviated that class period, but all the other Western Civs throughout the day are still going to be stuck at that higher number because it's not fair to try to shuffle a kid's entire schedule around in September to get them into that now smaller class. So that's the challenge that we face with that.
Any other questions? Okay. Any other comments? Anything? Okay.
So is that it?
That's it for now.
Wow, that's a
We
big
have more reports later.
more reports later. All right, let's go to our FOIA request.
We had one FOIA request, and I think there was that was on the copier's information, start date of the fiscal budget, and then there was some information on vaping. We had one question on vaping. Mr. Mannon sent in that report that when the board got their discipline report, that was grouped together, both vaping and any kind of like marijuana cases. Our system groups all those together. But this was specifically asking for the vaping and the nicotine, so that's why they were split apart for the FOIA. But going forward for the future board reports, Mr. Mann said he will separate the categories so it can show both vaping, nicotine, and then vaping if it was also a possession of marijuana. School report card. Mary Ann, can you click that link? So one of the requirements by the state is that we do review the school report card at a public board meeting. I'm looking to... Mary Ann is going to pull up the link there. I have the extra mouse today so I can move around with you a little bit, but I wanted to pull it up myself here so I could have a little better idea. Just because it's kind of hard to see on that screen. Okay, so this link is also on our website, and so when families click under the district link and they see school report card, this is now the interactive school report card that the state is using. Obviously, it provides a general snapshot on the first page. As you can see, we are a commendable school. We have a 94% graduation rate, student mobility, 3%. It shows the district finances, the evidence-based funding, which is this piece here, and then chronic absenteeism, teacher retention. The great thing about the interactive report card is then when parents click on different boxes, it will provide, explanation as well as breakdowns of information. Some different charts will have historical trends, but it provides a real detailed snapshot of the school district for people either already residing in the school district or considering moving into the school district. If I go back, each of the tabs on the left, so it has a school enrollment tab. It also has a student tab. So if you click on the student tab, you can see the enrollment. You can see our percentage of low income, percentage with IEPs, percentage of homeless, English language learners, our average daily attendance, which is 95%, student mobility rate, chronic absenteeism, dropout rate, chronically truant students, all that information is listed. And then, like I stated earlier, some of that has historical trends. So I'm trying to click on my screen and your screen at the same time. So if you see, like for the 94.6 in our average daily attendance, you can click on the 5-year trend, and then it will show you how RB has been doing for the last 5 years. And then some of the other tabs for the teacher tab. Wait a second here. It will break down our teacher demographics. Now, last year, we tried to ask teachers. However, we do not require teachers to report their ethnicity. But we did we did make it voluntary so teachers could report that so we could get a better idea of our demographics of our teaching staff. This shows you the number of teachers with a master's, student-teacher ratio, teacher retention rate, average salary, the teacher attendance rate, and then teacher education.
Can I ask a question, or are you still going?
Sure, go ahead.
So the teacher attendance rate, I know that we work to put an incentive into the teacher contract about teacher attendance, and that 60% there, that's for teachers. Can you read what that says? Like,
So
what is that?
the teacher attendance this is the percentage of teachers with fewer than 10 absences. So right now, roughly 40% of our teachers average about 10 sick days a year.
Yeah, can I just ask, and maybe, I don't know if Dr. Freitas knows this, but, and I would hope, is that part of the evaluation process? I know that school code requires teacher attendance to be considered as part of the evaluative process. Is that something that's looked at for teachers that have a pattern of 10 or more? And Dr. Freitas probably doesn't know this, but
Kristen, you
is
want to
that-
comment on that, or do you want me to comment?
The past.
I'm just
I
curious.
can. Yeah, we certainly look for a pattern, as there can be extenuating circumstances for, one particular year for a teacher to need to be out for 10 plus sick days. And that would fall in the Danielson model. There's not, the Danielson model is the state-approved framework that we use for teacher evaluations. And there is not a particular line item for that, and so it falls under professionalism. So there is a little disconnect between, the state code and the Danielson rubric, but it would fall under professionalism. But we do look for a pattern over multiple years and not just 1 year.
Of course. Well, I just asked because, one of the biggest indicators of student achievement is teacher attendance, right? Like, we need our teachers in our classrooms. So I was just curious, so I looked up a couple of other high schools. I was just curious to see, because is 59.5%, is that average, is that good, is that bad, like where does that fall? So I looked up a couple nearby high schools, LT is at 81, Hinsdale South is at 75%, Morton West is at 71%. So it's my hope that the incentives that we put into the teacher contract, my hope is that we can try to get that number to go up. Is there any way that, how Mr. Mannon reports out a couple times a year on student attendance, is there any way we could have a report maybe a little more often than just the school report card?
You mean on teacher attendance? He
Yeah,
does
because this is
student
just
attendance.
once a year, so.
He does student attendance.
Is there any way that we
gonna
could
add that
get
to the
something on
attendance.
teachers?
Weren't we gonna add that?
Yes, so President Smithing had asked that I pull some attendance data. I sent out an email yesterday looking at roughly a third of the school, we're a little over a third of the school year is complete. And it does look like there's been a slight improvement, but we have, after 1/3 of the school year, we have approximately 25% of the staff is on track to have at least 10 or more absences. So if we stay on that track, it would be an improvement from what you're seeing up here with the 60% or 59.5.
Yes, a huge
But we
improvement.
would need to see how that plays out through the spring when the weather changes and over the winter break and some of that stuff. So I can provide the board, when we get through 2/3, a copy of that report and just kind of keep running that and provide an update on that.
And when Dave does the attendance,
Just do it by semester.
he could just add a line item for the teachers. He's doing the students.
Just because if
right?
this only comes out once a year.
Sure,
I mean,
it's-
how are
it's-
we gonna know if
It's
those
very
incentives?
retrospective, right? It's-
Correct. I
Right.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, what can you do, what conversation can you have if it's already done and
Just if
over with?
The incentives are working.
All right, and I think, Hector, I think you're hearing this, so the board's interest is I would make sure you talk to the building administrators and make sure we're keeping an eye. If there's any attendance patterns where teachers having multiple years where they take more than 10, that should be referenced.
This will be part of my professional conversations.
Okay? Okay, then it talks, each gives you a highlight, each tab highlights the administrators, average salary, number of administrators per student ratio, similar to teachers, student. Then you have the school highlights. It lists all of our academic courses, activities. So there's multiple areas of information to help communicate to the public. And so, like I stated, this is on our website. I know the board has talked about improving communication. This is a really good interactive tool that's available on our website where people can get kind of the all-encompassing snapshot of the district.
Would it be possible if, I know we do talks with the principal, but possibly even getting a principal talk at some of our local libraries to go over the school report card? I don't know if there'd be a time of year where it makes sense to invite the public in, especially if they didn't have students to the library, to say, we'd like to share our student report card with you, and if you have questions, come and see it. That might be a nice way to engage some of our community members who don't have students And,
I really like that.
yeah,
Good idea.
and you could go through the data on, you know,
Well, we can visit that. I know Hector can go through some of this, or at least do the same presentation as Coffee that's coming up. And then maybe we can put this link in our newsletter, and we've talked about dropping our newsletter off at some of the local libraries. We're still figuring out the cost to just print up those, so maybe this is something we could add to that, and then if we get some feedback from that, we could do a forum where people could come and we could discuss it.
yeah, if we did a forum that was at a library where you would have people who don't have kids in the school, but, you know, they're cognizant of their tax bill, they can come
It
and.
goes into that, trying to reach that community member. When I was at the Veterans Day breakfast, I asked the table of the elderly gentleman the question, you know, and it came up. The library really came up as something that they go and they do. They go to the library
Yeah.
and they do that. And I thought back to our conversations, Laura, and I think that all ties in there because it does make sense. Instead of doing it in this forum, where it's 7 o'clock at the school, we do it over there at 4 o'clock or 3:30.
10 o'clock.
I mean,
Right, and
10
the
10 in the
library-
morning might not work for us, but,
Right.
and it might not work for a forum.
And the library sends out their newsletter, it could be part of, you know, something they're going to do, or even young couples that are looking at a neighborhood or something might want to come and they have younger kids, are they gonna stay here, are they gonna look to buy a house somewhere else? I mean, I think it's a nice,
Or we could bring in, you can invite the real estate agents.
yeah.
We do a realtor breakfast already. We go through all this with our realtors.
Yeah, there's a good one.
We do it at the village.
Still feel we have to do a little more, because we heard that message loud and clear during the campaign. We're,
Okay.
a lot going on, but it's not all getting out there.
Okay, is there any other comments or questions on the school report card?
No, just student attendance is 94.6, right?
Yes.
On there, and teacher attendance is so much less.
Yeah, it's not apples to apples because that's the average daily attendance, and the
Sure.
teachers is listing people that have 10 or more absences.
Right.
But it's not,
We want, right, we.
Correct.
Every day we say we want kids in the seats so they can learn. We need teachers in their rooms to teach them.
correct, absolutely, sure.
All right, student
Okay, Mary Ann, we'll move on to the next item. Student advisor to the Board of Education. Again, the board asked me to put together a draft. Obviously, this is a first draft. We did receive some comments on this. I'm trying to find it. What page is it on board book?
54.
So below is a draft regarding the timeline process. This is the memo I submitted to the board. This was based on the information I pulled from the other districts that have a student advisor, kind of what their role is and how this would work. My thought would be they would attend regular meetings. They serve as an advisor to the board to give the student perspective, but also it's kind of a dual role in that they're serving as an advisor to the student body of what the board's discussing or covering, and an opportunity to share stuff back with the student body. They would meet with the superintendent and or principal prior to each board meeting just to kind of discuss what they wanted to share with the board or things they wanted to address, and prepare a monthly report for the board on behalf. This is what most of the other school districts that have a student board member ask that student and board member to do. The question that was submitted is this kind of similar to what's already happening between the principal report and the student association report. This is a draft, so the board can figure this out. Maybe that student's report is something not related to student association, but maybe some things that they're getting feedback on from their classmates, and whether it's in the cafeteria or after-school activities or access to the building on non-school days, things like that, that maybe they want to discuss with the principal and superintendent and find a way to inform the board on some of those items. So this is all tentative and can be modified as we kind of go forward with this process. The student should be a junior. I'm under candidate now. Student would be a currently enrolled junior, slated to in good standing, slated to graduate in the spring of '21. They should participate in at least one extracurricular activity. Now, I highlighted the next sentence, due to the position's responsibilities, the student should not hold another elected office. Some school districts have this in their application process, some don't. So that's why I put it as a highlight to this board. You can discuss that and determine some of the thought process behind that is if they're an elected official for another board and they're taking on the weight of that office and doing that office with the fidelity that they ran for or went for, we shouldn't be trying to stretch them too thin or have the same people kind of sending out the same message, right? So it gives an opportunity to other students that maybe weren't elected as a class officer or something like that.
So I just had a question then. Prepare a monthly report for the board on behalf of students at RB. I would kind of expect our student council to do that, as the idea, at least in my mind, the idea of having a student board member would be more to be similar to other board members, and we don't each prepare a report and report out on the constituents that we are engaged with over the 2 or 3 weeks that we're absent. Like, we don't each come back and say, well, from our part of the neighborhood, this is what I've heard.
Yeah.
Bring that back. So I kind of feel if we're having a student board member, they should more mimic kind of the role of a regular board member and interact with the content here. But feedback from the student body probably should be coming from our student council.
But didn't you just say you heard loud and clear in the election that we needed to get more information out? So those are kind of constituents you're serving.
But
Wes will bring up a lot about,
Right.
hey, I'm hearing this in my neighborhood about the pay to participate or what's going on with. So
in
you guys,
context of the
you know-
situation, but we don't each prepare a report
No,
every board meeting and present.
Correct, but I think the idea of having this person here was so that there could be a direct pipeline between the student body and the Board of Education, and someone to serve as their representative.
We could have a, I think to the question's point, Laura's asking the same question as the question asked, why isn't that the same thing, right? Is that, we have I have a president's report. I don't often report out on things, right? They have a space where what we wouldn't normally, we don't go, we have a space later where we want to talk about things, right? They would have their own designated space.
Yeah, you may
Like
decide, we may have a student advisor report, they may not have anything to report that month, or this board may decide they'll bring it up for a future discussion item, just like every other board member does on the agenda process.
Right.
I don't have a preference either way, I'm just.
It's just kind of a spin the idea, and we develop it the way we want it to be developed.
We
I
might
think-
have talked about this last time, but what leadership opportunities besides SA in this sort of vein already exist? Does Dr. Freitas or Mr. Mannon, don't they have sort of a core group that talk with them about safety and those kinds of
So
things?
monthly I host a principals forum. It's open to the student body. I do have a group of students that come frequently and consistently, but it is open forum. So any student can come. Sometimes I have 10 students, sometimes I have 30 students. So I do provide a space for students, to engagement and bring their feedback on what's happening in the school. So I have that happening currently.
I'm just kind of thinking out loud about how can we fit this student into what already exists to be that bridge between like possibly something that you're doing or Mr. Mannon is doing to the board. I
Maybe
I
that
don't know
brings up a
that's the right thing. I'm just kind of thinking.
Well, it
out
sounds
loud.
like some of the discussion is back to what is the purpose of the individual? Are they
Right,
to
what is the
inform the
why?
board of what's
Right.
happening in the halls? Or is it to become engaged in the board process and read the packet and, provide when we're discussing, the enrollment and staffing projections, to provide a student perspective on enrollment and staffing projections? So I think there needs to be a little bit of clarity and then a little bit more guidance, because otherwise you're going to get students who apply for this who are the kind of students that run for SAE, right? It's something to aspire to, and you can kind of include it in your background. Is that the student we want? Do we want a student that actually has some thoughtful ideas that maybe attends Dr. Freitas' events but needs to be kind of moved along to say, now we want to hear from you at the board level? I think we need to have that discussion a little bit.
So
What are we looking
I
for?
did talk to 2 different superintendents who have the high school, the students on the board, the student advisor role. And they kind of gave 2 good examples that actually tie in directly to Deanna's suggestion. It was like they were talking about changing their start time of the school year and finals, changing their final schedule to, before the winter break so that it would align more to, and there was a lot of concern from the board, and there was like this historic, and they had a heated discussion, and then all of a sudden they kind of, well, why don't we ask the student advisor? And the student advisor was like, the students would really prefer, like, it was, the board was kind of like way off to what the student feedback was, right? The student was like, hey, we would really prefer to have finals before break so we can actually have a winter break and not have to do homework or be somewhat thinking about what we got to do when we get. And then there was another superintendent who brought up, sometimes the discussion we get is, that's why they had the principal kind of meeting before the board meeting as a filter. So like sometimes if they were bringing stuff that could be more handled at the principal level or the administrative level, that's not stuff that necessarily was reported back to the board. But if it was something like, hey, we need to reconfigure the CAF, or the board should really consider about maybe expending some money on reconfiguring the CAF so students can get through the lunch line faster and have an actual 15, 20 minutes to sit and eat their lunch. Those are the kinds of things I think the board would want to hear about, right? That so those are examples of some of the discussion and feedback I got back from other soups that, reconfiguring the cafeteria was never anything on the board's mind or superintendent's mind or even the principal's mind, right? And then all of a sudden, the student advisor brought forward like, yeah, we can't get through the CAF and we can't eat lunch, and so by the time we get paid, do all our stuff, we have 10 minutes to eat lunch.
But my concern is that second example, that every meeting now becomes a student-driven, well, I think we might like to have this or that. The purpose of the board meeting is to do the district business. At the end, we ask, what should we consider to put on the agenda? Something like that would then have to go through the process to say, we'd like to add to the agenda, how functionality of the cafeteria. But if every meeting becomes, well, we'd like the halls painted blue, I'm just putting that for an example, or different kind of lifestyle or quality of life, so to speak, issues for the school, I would expect that to come through a different forum and then come and quarterly or something else, but not every meeting become kind of
I
a
don't think
quality
it
of.
needs to be every meeting. I think some of these schools that ran this don't have committee of the whole. So maybe the student only reports out at our committee of the whole, like I only report out in Westland. It does not have to be every meeting. The other thing, again, I'll repeat, I think that's why that filter piece is there, where they meet with the superintendent and principal prior to the board meeting. So if they're bringing up stuff that's things that can be handled at the building level, some of that can be redirected and addressed at the building level and not even have to, can be resurfaced back to student association or his principal's forum and not at the board table.
Yeah, and I would argue that, yes, the board is here to conduct the district's business, but some of those high schools that I've researched also, they have a plaque in their boardroom that says the kids come first, or it's all about the kids. So I think there is an attitudinal component, and a couple of things. The student association, as we've seen tonight at other meetings, they do incredible work. It's a lot community-based. It's, all the right things, but that's one area of engagement. I happen to believe that, when we had a conversation earlier about teachers and do we have the right amount of teachers in the classroom, whatever, shouldn't we try to utilize everything that happens in the school, including this board meeting, as like a classroom? So I just fundamentally think if we have a student or two here, and they participate, it's like, what better classroom could you have when they start to hear how we debate, where they participate? So I see that as sort of a fundamental thing too. And the other thing, this goes a little bit to the examples Kevin brought up, I believe that we have an adult sometimes we have adult blind spots, which has to do with a couple of weeks ago when in October, there was an issue with all of a sudden students wanted to get engaged in the global climate strike, but it wasn't communicated. That apparently didn't come up in the meeting with the principal, but it was on students' mind because, I don't know, so many of them walked out. It's clearly a blind spot. And we can sit here and say like, oh no, we don't worry kids, we got you covered, we do the district's business, but I am convinced that we actually are not doing the entire business of a district because our kids have concerns like that one that was serious enough for them to accept, an unexcused absence. And so for me, this is quite fundamental in also, if we are to adopt this, it's basically an acknowledgement to the community, in particular to the students, that says, we want to hear from you, and we take you seriously. And to say they want to paint the hallways blue, if they say that, then we'll say no. But if they say we care deeply about our future, and what are we doing? Are we talking about science? We have a debate about science. We should talk about science. And the fact that the jury's out, and we're not doing enough, and the students know it. And groups like us, the adults, have failed to act on it. And so I think we have to start being honest about it. And I'm going a little bit on my, on a limb here, but that's why I feel so passionately about let's just invite them in the room so that they can see that we're sincere about this, that we want to hear from them, and all the other arguments about, they're going to ask for blue hallways. Come on.
I think we have to be careful about directing this so much that the kid doesn't, that the student representative doesn't, it's their spot. We can't say, okay, you have to do this, 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 and this, then we're just placing, the most popular kid or the smartest kid or the most liked kid, whoever is chosen, into that spot, and then they're following A, B, C. They need to be the representative of, and I think we'll find that student, over time, you'll find good ones and bad ones as
Sure.
there is in regular public life, but by and large, you'll have somebody who really cares, who's going to have their own forum. They might go to, the principal forum also, but then they might have their own.
But also, I think, and align with that, and you can't assume we know what that student's agenda might be. I mean, they could be on either end of the political spectrum. Sure. They could come with any type of their own ideas and concepts. So I think the selection process, which I think is where this kind of discussion was going about, who's reviewing it and what kind of student is kind of best equipped to be a fair emissary of student needs, I think is a really important piece of it.
Looking at structure, I think Gina could share some insight. When they were doing the search for the principal, they had students on it, and there was the structure similar to every adult, teacher, community member, everybody on there, but the students were integrated into the same structure as every other, and maybe you could articulate a little bit about it, but it went pretty well.
I think in that form it went really well. I'm excited about the idea of adding a student to the board. I think we do have to put a system in place, but I think we probably have to put a system that we think is what's best, and then we have to dive in and have the student join and then play it out for a year. And I would imagine we probably are going to make some tweaks then.
Right.
There's so much, we haven't had it before, so we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But
I
know that every time I've been involved with the kids, that was just one example, they always rise to the occasion, and they completely surprise you with their thought process. They really do. I'm excited about the possibility of it, and I do think we just kind of have to jump in.
No, I totally agree,
I agree
with that. And I think that even in terms of the procedure, maybe, there's a nomination process, I think, even as outlined here. There probably should be some sort of teacher and administration test of sort of saying this is a legitimate candidate. And then after that, I actually like the idea that the students, that there's an election, that the students pick their own representatives. And I would just also offer, one or two. I mean, what would be the downside of two? Because I know some districts have done that too, and if they came in a pair, they might be a little less intimidated with, you know, microphones and so forth. So I'm just saying, if there's interest, and you had two strong people, you know, why not add them? And if we only have one, then that's fine also. But
If we go to the selection process, so the tentative timeline that I laid out was we would advertise the position, receive teacher-student nominations, right? So teachers could nominate somebody, and or the students can nominate themselves, and we'll have an application process. And there would have to be some things, we'd have to make sure they're in a good academic standing. Maybe they have to get verification from all their teachers they're in good academic standing. I haven't laid out the nuts and bolts of that. And then the idea was, you know, go through the process, kind of run an election like Tom was saying. My thought was let the students kind of pick the final 4 or 6 that we interview. So at least there feels there's some democratic process of their selecting their voice or representation. And then, you know, whether it's the personnel advisory council or the president and the superintendent or the president and the principal, we can have somebody then interview the final 4, and we'll come up with a uniform set of questions, and then we can hopefully have this person approved at the May board meeting, and then their first meeting would be the May Cow meeting, and they would go from May Cow to May Cow. And that would be their term. So what I heard from the feedback tonight is obviously how this will work and the role, we have some time to develop that. Where their first meeting's not going to be till the May Cow. But what I'm hearing from all of you is I should start working on the nuts and bolts with Hector. And maybe, I did go and meet with the student association. I went to the general student association meeting, which is all the class officers and students that are in part of student association. So there were probably 40 to 50 kids in this room when I came in and spoke to them last week, Wednesday, I believe that was. And I got some general feedback from them, which is how I came up with the you know, the timeline and kind of the nomination process. And there was some concern, like, hey, is someone that's involved in athletics or activities, you know, kind of not being it, probably won't be able to do this, because if they're expected to be at every board meeting, there's going to be conflicts with maybe some other events or contests. You know, those are all real things, which I think, you know, why that one school district has that language where they're not in another office, or you have to be careful of, because if we're going to do this right and it's going to be a sincere position where they're going to be a true advisor to the board, they should be expected to be here at every meeting. So
That could be the
Well, I
benefit
think
of
we'll probably
having
need to
2.
put in some little bit of training, like all new board members, we have the Open Meetings Act trainings, what you can say, what you can't say. And
They would need that anyway, right?
yeah, but I mean, we do that because.
well, they're a non-voting member.
No, but you,
Probably not.
I could check with the other. Having
not the
them do the
open-
Open Meetings Act is fine.
but what I'm saying is, when we talk, if we say things that are irresponsible, you can't take that back. It's on TV, it's out there, and so we need to be careful.
Yeah, I think that's.
And we can't have opinions. So when we put that, like you said today, we failed or didn't do that. Well, do we have data to prove that? So we have to be very careful at putting our opinions out there without actual data. And definitely, we should never use names.
Yeah, I think we're getting a little too into. There's some things I can work on
But
with that.
I'm just saying, we want to be careful because what is said and thrown out there can't be taken back.
I think we need to go back to this. Are the students electing it, or are we choosing them? Because I think
Well,
still a little confused
the
here.
students are electing their final, depending on how many nominations we would get, we would do some type of an election process where the students can vote for, depending on the number that we would get, 3, 4, 5 delegates to then be interviewed by a representative or 2 of the board.
So if there's
and the
20 kids that come
administration.
out, you're not interviewing 20 kids.
Correct.
The kids whittle
Right.
it down, and then
So,
you.
But is this the
student body
election at the same time
president
as the
is
student?
elected, right?
Yeah,
It is.
same
yes.
question. So is the
Principal
election at the
doesn't
same
pick.
time? Is this another
would be
position
at
on
the
that
same-
ballot?
It would
Probably.
it's a little earlier, I believe, right? Chris and Hector won't know. When do we do, like, class?
April, I believe.
I mean, I would think you would want to keep it all on one
Yeah.
ballot.
I don't,
Well, I think it depends if the board's saying that person shouldn't be on the student advisor to the board if they're gonna be in another elected office.
I don't have an
it
opinion.
would be just, if you were to, right, so you'd be one more on the ballot, you'd be on different.
Yeah, I don't think there's a ballot like where we have a computerized system where people go to polls. And
Well-
I think it's I think they go during their lunch hour and they cast their votes for kids and
Put
they
it
have
on
a
the paper,
slate.
put it in the little thing.
So this, I was gonna try to run a little more where I would send an email to the entire student body and say, these 6 people are running for student advisor to the board, here's what the role entails. Please highlight, or please click on 3 names that you feel would be good representatives of the student body. I was gonna do something of that.
Like a Google form?
Correct.
But also, don't you think if it were possible that all nominees get sort of pre-qualified through probably the teachers who know the kids the best, that then when this election happens, that let's say the student with the highest vote count is basically elected, but the board or a group or the superintendent and the principal or whoever sort of they probably should interview them, but that's more like just to make sure that it isn't some other red flag, because if that were the case, you go to the next one. I don't necessarily like the idea that you have an election and you pick 4 or 6, and then the board sort of picks from that anyway, because I think they should be.
Now, the other
I'm here, I think it should be they just elect somebody, and maybe we make the process of getting elected just like you have to go get signatures or so forth, and hard enough where, the guy isn't gonna do it. Who
Right,
doesn't really wanna do it, right?
Yes, right.
I mean, you ought to be invested. We have to make it so they're invested, and that might be
The
going
one
to
thing I was
teachers
trying
and
to
recommendations
eliminate-
and get recommendations and so forth.
The one thing I was trying to eliminate by having and I don't know what the magic number is for highest vote getter 6. I don't know. I was just giving you a draft. But the one thing I was trying to eliminate is the popularity contest. So it'd just be if 4 or 5 kids run for this office just because someone gets the highest votes, I'm not sure, necessarily they might be the best representative of the student body who's going to have that big picture perspective of am I helping make decisions for all 4 classes, or am I making decisions for what's popular or because I'm a popular, right? Like when we picked, when we did the student representatives on the principal process, we used a very diverse selection process to pick that, and their insight was so that was my only reason of kind of running an election, so there's a student voice in it, but then there's also whether the committee that does the interviews could be whoever, it could be teachers or board members, it could be however you want to do it, but I would just say that you do have to kind of take into effect to make sure it's not just a popularity contest.
It worked very well with your interview process, so that whatever you did for that, because the students you had on the committee to interview the principal, you thought had great insight and
and we got
good representative.
Honestly, we got some selection from different people. Some teachers gave me some students that they thought would be really good candidates. Kristen at the time gave me some students. Dave Manning gave me students. Brendan Curtin gave me students. So I kind of had someone from athletics. I had someone from student association. Some classroom leaders that we maybe never hear of, right? But that might be a true leader within the school. So that was my thought process. I have in 2 steps there. If the board doesn't want it, we don't have to do it. But I would caution you as a former principal, there is some popularity factor that might go into just having an election.
So you're thinking more that the election would be for the student body to choose the nominees, and then
Then there
whoever
could be
the
a panel.
committee is picks
Sure.
the actual person, but the students get to pick the nominees.
Right.
Like, who do you want to be the 3 right? That's what you're
Correct.
thinking?
Or might you want to get your plausible candidates through the same process you did on the interview body?
That's in there under January, February, where I can get teacher recommendations.
Yeah.
So I plan on putting this out to the students, but also to the teachers. So some teacher may go up to you know, Wes sitting in first period biology
Yeah.
and say, hey, I think you should really go for this. You would be a great person for them to consider, right?
Right.
So there are some, there's an opportunity for teachers to nominate people, students to apply.
Whatever around the corner, dude.
Yeah.
Right, so I'm trying to cover all our bases where we can get the widest pool, candidate pool as possible.
And you went over this with the students at one point, and they,
Not this draft, I went over what the purpose was, what I'm looking to put together, and what kind of feedback they could give me on
and based on
what
their
would be the best way to
feedback,
do some
you came
selection
up with
process.
this.
Correct.
Okay.
So when do we need to get a consensus of how to do this? Is it next in December? Because you're starting in January.
Yeah, I would say just by December, like, I mean, if you're okay with this process, obviously I can tweak the nuts and bolts, but I'd like to, so when they get back from winter break, I can send something to teachers that if you have a student in your class and you think they'd be a good advisor, you can nominate them through this process. Students can, I'll send out something to the students, they can apply.
But to clarify, you're looking for some firm feedback on concurrent offices, right?
The yellow piece is where I need the
Right.
firm,
But even the clause before that, participate in at least one extracurricular activity. I think that's open for some
yes, absolutely.
discussion.
Right. My thought on that was you'd want to eventually, you want to maybe have somebody that's at least getting a different perspective, so they're not just, they're interacting with other groups of students.
I just think.
But we don't have to
my
make it a
thought in-
requirement.
Right, my thought in reading that, it lends to that whole time commitment question that the student association raised.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes. So maybe some feedback, and I can put this in a Friday update or send a Google form to the board, just kind of get some more direction on the pre-requirements
Yeah.
for the candidate. How about the selection process? Is it making sense now a little bit what I laid out? Obviously, it needs to be tweaked, but do you see what I'm trying to?
Yes.
And everybody seems okay with that?
Yeah, teacher, maybe coach, because you have some,
When I say teacher, I'm meaning any adult.
okay.
Yeah, could be an administrator saying, hey, this person would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ramona, what do you
I
have?
don't, you know, like, a lot of times I go to the kids and like, one of the things I'm doing right now, I'm having a problem, and I'm like, you kids help me figure it out. What do you think about this, right? I think they're, especially at this age, like, my thought is to take this back to that group and say, like, this is kind of what we're laying out. What do you think, right? I came to you for this, for like the pre-work. Now I've come up with this, and I don't know. That's kind of, if I was in charge, that's what I would do. You don't have to do that.
Thanks, Ramona, even though you're one of my boss, is that a recommendation in a direction, or?
Just put it out there. No, you don't have to.
Well, really,
I can have my
honestly, though, at the end of the day,
That's how I do it, but I'm okay.
at the end of the day, though, this is really, it still is what the board wants. Because the board, this is really, it's the Board of Education, and so they're looking for a student perspective. So
Yeah.
what I'm saying, you know, I mean, like, I think the primary direction needs to come from the board. Do they want to have students that are involved in activities, that it doesn't bother them? Do they want to have students that, you know, have so many teacher recommendations or not? You know, that's, if you make the process too tough, you're gonna lose applicants.
But you have to make it tough enough that you get someone that
Really wants to do it.
really wants to do it.
Well, I think that's why having that
It's not
second
just
step in
popularity.
that, I think by also having that second step in the process, when you know, those top 3 or 4 or 5, whatever number we come up with, based on how many apply, and it may be low the first year. But I think by having that second step of that process of that interview, you'll kind of get the impression of what kid really is serious about wanting to do this and how they're going to approach it, right? We can keep it so it's a short amount of questions, and it's really them talking about how they're going to advocate for the students and inform the board, right? And then the board's panel will decide who they think the strongest candidate was. Or at that time say, maybe we go with 2 this first year, or maybe we had 2 really good kids that came out to be the same. Okay?
All right, so you're
All
gonna,
right. I will work on sending a Google Doc out to see if there's any specific things we want to put for a candidate, just to kind of get a vote of the board or a tally of the board. And I'll tweak this a little bit from the feedback I got tonight, and then I'll bring you what I think is a final draft in December.
Visitor statements. All right, come on, I gotta read this, Ed. The Board of Education welcomes and encourages the participation of its citizens in the business of the school district. There are 2 points in the meeting where visitor statements are scheduled. Citizens are welcome to raise questions or make comments at either one. Comments may be limited to 3 minutes per individual and cannot be combined. Please note the Board of Education will not answer questions or encourage in dialogue during these visitor comments. If a person would like additional time to address the board, such a request should be submitted in writing 48 hours prior to the meeting to the superintendent. In addition, the Board of Education is interested in receiving suggestions and concerns from members of the community. Any individual may make a suggestion or expression of concern at the district school office. All suggestions and or concerns will be referred to the appropriate level staff member or district administrator who is most able to respond in a timely manner. Each concern or suggestion shall be considered on its merits. Any individual who is not satisfied after following the channels of authority may file a grievance under the board policy 2:260, the uniform grievance procedure. Neither this policy nor the uniform grievance procedure creates an independent right to a hearing before the board. For more details, please refer to board policy 2:230, public participation at Board of Education meetings and petitions to the board, and board policy 8:110, public suggestions and concerns. Wow, that's a lot longer than I remember.
I think that's our old message. I think that's
That's
the old one. That's not-
extensively lengthy.
Yeah, no, that's the old message.
I thought that was a lot longer than that.
Yeah, my eyes started to glaze over.
No, I think we have a new message. I think that's just the old message.
I'm just impressed that you got through.
If you want to come up to the mic
Sit
so we
down.
can hear you, and then what I'll do is I'll just put my hand up when there's like 30 seconds left. Should you,
Okay.
towards you get towards the end.
My name is Ed Cote, 9512 Lexington, Brookfield, Illinois. Real quick, I only came here for one other thing, but now I took all these other notes. First things first is not everybody knows what co-teaching is. So if that question ever comes up for the people that are watching, when we're watching, sometimes these things come up. We don't know what it is. So although everybody on the board may know, a quick run through of the definition is always helpful. As far as staffing, it says 5 to 7 classes, 3 to 5 classes, etc. Some classes are 2 periods long, so is that per period or is that per class? Like, so if you have a class that's 2 periods, does that count towards the FTE for per period, right? Not per class, okay. It just wasn't clear to me on that, so, because it just kept saying per class and I wasn't sure if that was covering all of that. As far as the items that you were just talking about for student advisor, I agree with Mr. Jacobs. Students are the most important thing when it comes to the school. But there is still district business, so very valid points across the board. Sometimes the students just want to be heard. I believe you have an elected council already for student council. So I don't know if that could be part of their charter to be the advisors to the board as opposed to going through a whole different process for election. Or if you decide to go through a whole, have a different person that's outside of the elected council, the current elected council, maybe it's for that council to select a student advisor because it's representation of the students, not a representation that the board picks out of the students. So from that point of view, now for the real reason I'm here, there's actually 2 things. I was asked to pass one thing on to the board that the, well, okay, there's 3 things. First, getting information out. We have other school districts. I'm a member of Village Board. I'm not here on official business. Brookfield Village Board. We have other school districts that show up to Brookfield and run through and give us their report cards, and they do it in front of our village. So if that's ever a consideration, not just going to the libraries, but you could do it at a board meeting. We also have the availability at other items such as, see, I had it. We have farmers markets, et cetera, where you can set up a table and you can just be open to questions to the public. We do that as well. Other boards do that.
Now back to the real. I was asked to pass along information that since the newly elected principal, there's been this really good energy throughout the school, and it's been passed on. I did stop by and I told the individual already, but we wanted to pass it on to the board. And this isn't just from one family, it's from multiple families. Now, why I was originally here. I'm a member of the Joshua Harris VFW, the local VFW. I was present, and for the members of the local VFW that were also present, they wanted to make sure that we passed on information saying thank you. The presentation was beautiful. We were treated so well. Everybody was treated well, and they were very happy with the whole presentation. They were very thankful to the students. The orchestra was great. The choir was great. Thank you to Mr. Baum. Everything was just so nice. And we wanted to officially say thank you from the local VFW for the members of the VFW that were to make it, because we split between LT and Brookfield. And so, but we wanted to say thank you, and it was greatly appreciated.
Right.
And the students were great. I was hoping that I'll be able to say at least to the students that were here, but that was a little bit later. So that's really all I had. Just thank you very much. It was really good in the VFW. Thanks, Sean.
That's great, Ed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No? Okay. Next Ed. Additional discussion items. At this point in the meeting, the Board of Education members may request to add an additional discussion item. Right?
Nope.
Okay. Consent agenda action item.
Motions, suggested
sorry.
motions.
The Board of Education, Township High School, District 208, Cook County, Illinois, takes the following action on listed consent agenda items. Approves minutes from the meetings held on October 8th and 22nd, 2019, open and closed, as presented in the November 12th, 2019 Board Agenda Packet.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Left? All right. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Old business, action items.
No updates on life safety. We'll be going out to bid. Kristen is coordinating that with the architect, and Joel, we should be going out to bid and hopefully award, have the bid opening in December, and I'll bring the bid packet for formal board approval at the first meeting in January.
New business, payment of bills.
There were 3 questions that were submitted in regards to the bills. The first is on board book page 84 and on biometric impressions, as well as page 134, occupational health centers. These kind of go hand in hand. So the first one is in regards to fingerprinting, and occupational health centers is in regards to random drug tests. Both of these charges were billed to special education transportation. So during the school day, we currently use RB staff members to drive one of our mini buses to transport our transition students, as well as students that are in some vocational programs. That is a cost savings to the district rather than going to get a bus, whether it's through First Student or Grand Prairie. There are some state requirements associated with that, and we are in the process of getting some new employees certified as a school bus driver, so they do need to get fingerprinted through a separate organization, as well as a physical and a drug test, and then to keep their certification, sometimes staff members get randomly selected for a drug test. So that's what those charges were. On board book page 115, there was a question about the driver's ed cars, and this is not the first time we've had a question, so moving forward, we will add the quantity 2 for the driver's ed leases, so that
I just
anyone...
thought that's a really
Yes.
nice car we're leasing.
Yes.
It's almost $600 a month.
So that anyone who looks at it can tell that we are leasing 2 cars for the price of $540 for the month. And then on board book page 144, on the bottom, towards the bottom of that page, the $2,000 that was spent on a refrigerator is for the cafeteria. And Joel and I assessed, based off of the repair costs, that it made more sense to purchase a new refrigerator. And those were the only questions submitted on on bills.
Okay, can we get a motion, Mary Ann, to either pull up the motion or if the board can
I
go
got it
back
in
to
front of me. The Board of Education, Township High School, District 208, Cook County, Illinois, approves the payment of bills as presented and listed in the November 12th, 2019 Board Agenda Packet. Second.
Second?
Need someone to second.
Second.
Tom Jacobs, second. We'll need a roll call on this, Mary.
Ms. Ruska? Yes. Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Ms. Sierra?
Yes.
Ms. Towner?
Yes.
Ms. Salas?
Yes.
Mr. Durkin?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes. Okay, B, the memorandum understanding between Riverside Brookfield High School and DLA Architects.
Every time we do it, we have a standing contract, an AIA agreement, and then what that AIA agreement requires is that we do an MOU with DLA for the specific project, what their roles and responsibilities, and also what the cost of their compensation will be. Since this is a small roof project, it should be around hopefully $500,000. The compensation is right at 9.5%. We need a resolution.
This is the first reading?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's correct, this is a first read.
Right, so it's just discussion?
It is, but I do believe, I think we need this signed before we can go out to bid.
Okay, so obviously we have a standing agreement. Historically, we did the $3 million. It was at 9%. When we did the $14 million in 2015, I think it was like 8.75, something of that nature. All the other agreement is not being amended, correct? So this is for them to handle the bid process, to go out to bid, do the specs, and help facilitate the work.
Correct.
And the bid is brought back to us then?
In January.
The current timeline we had set up was to publish the bid in towards the end of November and have the bids close early December, and then that gives us time to do reference checks and things of that nature, and then bring the recommendation to the board at the first meeting in January.
So 9.5%, $47,000.
Correct.
Which is per the master agreement, according to this. So this has been pre-negotiated and this for architecture and engineering services.
Correct.
What are your thoughts, Tom?
No, I think it's good. I'm good to go with it.
Do we want to vote on it tonight? What's the view of the board?
Oh, we said we weren't going to do that.
I know we said we weren't going to do that, but Kristen just said we needed to.
I'm fine.
Right? Isn't that what you just told us?
Well, we just got the bid timeline from Carrie yesterday or today that outlined that timeline. So we can certainly adjust the timeline. We're just trying to get the best price by being one of the first ones up to it. So it's the decision of the board.
By sitting on it just to sit on it, it could raise the cost of the project and pushing it till after.
So unless someone has some real, debate, which we're happy to debate, let's talk about it.
What are the chances it'll go down?
What will go down?
Well, you said the cost will go up. There's no chance by waiting it would go down.
No, you're probably
No,
not
because
gonna get
but the
less.
reason we're trying to get it out before the first of the year is once the roofers start aligning their work,
Right.
you're gonna get less people to bid. So the idea is to try to get the bids in before the winter break, before their roofing season and their bid season picks up, because then otherwise, if we just become one extra project to them, what's the
Incentive.
purpose
right.
of trying to give us a low bid?
Right. Yeah, so there's no, I guess my point was, there's really no upside to waiting.
Right. I mean, the only thing here is the cost of the architect, and as we discussed at the facilities council, and the AIA is in place usually, and Tom can speak with his professional perspective. The percentage fluctuates based on the size of the project. This project, we're hoping to come in less than $500,000.
Right.
So you're not going to get, you're talking pennies, and if you change it from 9 to 9.5 or something of that nature.
It's not a lot. So I guess, good.
Shall I read the resolution?
Hold on.
I'm good, but if we can, let's try not to, again, to not just put it in. I mean, I could see the benefit of voting on this, but it's a slippery slope.
Well, how about if I read it? You can vote no if you want.
True.
Okay, well, let's read the resolution.
Okay. Resolved that the Board of Education, Township High School, District 208, Cook County, Illinois, hereby approves the memorandum of understanding between Riverside Brookfield High School and DLA Architects Limited as presented in the November 12th, 2019 Board Agenda Packet.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have discussion, right? Discussion left. Okay, I think, Mary Ann, we need a roll call vote.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yes.
Ms. Sierra?
Yes.
Ms. Towner?
Yes.
Ms. Salas?
Yes.
Mr. Durkin?
Yes.
Ms. Ruska?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes. Proposed tax levy, first read. This will most likely be a first read. Right?
This is a first read. This is the first read of our proposed estimated tax levy that we will file in December, and you will approve in December. It was approved with the Finance Advisory Council on November 7th. And I will go into detail and explain all of the columns on the spreadsheet, but in general, the proposal is to approve a levy increase of 4.95% in order to capture taxes on new property and construction. District 208 is tax capped by the Consumer Price Index for the levy year of 2019, and this year's CPI figure to be used for the levy is 1.9%. So the draft proposal is to approve a levy to increase of 4.95% in order to capture the CPI, but then also to maximize the amount of money that we can capture on that new property and new construction. So at this time, I'd like to walk you briefly through the levy worksheet, which begins on page 186. And I know that this is a very long worksheet, so I also provided you a printed copy in case that's helpful as we're going through this. So I'd like to begin in column C. So columns A and B just show the funds that we levy in. And column C is the final extension that the district received with the loss factor in 2017. So the extension is basically the amount of money that we are entitled to receive from the tax levy in 2017. And the levy is explained in the footnote, or sorry, the loss factor is explained in the footnote below. But basically that is an anticipated amount or percentage of lost tax collection from the school district's levy amount, and Cook County adds that percentage for us. Traditionally, we've used 3% for the loss factor on operating funds, and traditionally it's been 5% on debt service as well. But the Cook County adds that in, and so that's why you see all these different numbers with the loss factor versus without the loss factor as we're going through this worksheet. So column D through H is really presenting information on last year's tax levy. So starting in column D, the board levy without any loss factor is listed at a little over $20 million, and the board levy is what a levy is what you ask for. When you go to column E, that is the extension without the loss factor, so that's the amount of money last year that the district was entitled to receive. And then column F is that extension with the 3% loss factor added in. So column F is highlighted in gray because that ultimately is the amount of money that the district was entitled to receive from last year's tax levy. Then column G and H are just providing some additional analysis. So G is looking at new money in 2018. So it's taking the money that we received from the tax levy 2017 versus the tax levy in 2018 last year. You can see we roughly got $463,000. That was an increase from what we were projecting, and that was primarily because we got some more new property than we were anticipating in construction. And then in column H, we're looking at the difference between last year what we levied or what we asked for versus our extension and what we actually were entitled to receive. And that's where the swing of $100,000 is coming from. So questions on that chunk before I move to kind of what we're anticipating for this year? Okay, so if you look at columns I through L, that's looking at our tax levy, our proposed tax levy for this year. So column I is looking at what we got or what we were entitled to receive last year, our extension, and increasing that by our CPI factor of 1.9%. Next to it is column J, that's adding that loss factor that Cook County adds in for us. So that's really what we can expect to receive next year. The reason column K is highlighted is because that is what we're going to be submitting to Cook County so that we can maximize that 4.95% only on the new property. Cook County will adjust it back down to CPI for everything else, but we have to submit the levy at the 4.95%. And then column L is taking that 4.95% and increasing it by the loss factor. I think that I may have lost a few of you, so are there any questions on that chunk? You can tell by some faces it's very late as well, and it's been a long board meeting.
Column M is the most important,
I was just
right?
going to say that's the
Okay.
punchline.
So as long as we're good with that, then we move to column L and column M, and column M is our expected new money from this year's tax levy versus last year's tax levy. And so as you can see for our operating funds, that is $372,353 in new money that we would be expecting. And then you can see, a slight increase in debt service as well. The last two columns, N and O, just provide some additional analysis. Column N is looking at of the new money that we're receiving, of that $372,000 that we're receiving, 83% of that new money is going to our ed fund. So most of our new money goes directly into our education fund. Column O is looking at the levy as a whole, and so looking at that roughly almost $21 million, what percent of that goes into the ed fund versus the other funds. So you can see 66% of the overall levy goes into the ed fund, and then O&M has 7% as the second highest. Debt service is always separate because it's not an operating fund, and technically Cook County levies that for you on your behalf. Any questions?
I did not receive any questions on the levy, Kristen, so unless someone has something tonight.
I did not. We also plan, in talking to the Finance Advisory Council, we are not required to do a public hearing because we're under the 5% threshold, but we have always had a hearing in order to make sure we're being transparent, and so we have set that up to advertise in the landmark that we are doing a public hearing at the next board meeting, even though we are not officially required to do so. That is it for my presentation.
Matters for closed session. Personal, student discipline, sale or lease of property pending litigation, collective negotiations.
School safety's on it.
School safety. Visitor statements, none. No, I'll read them. No shorter discussion items. Any discussion items?
None were requested.
Consideration of items for future meetings. Left? All right. Resolution for closed session.
The Board of Education, Township High School, District 208, Cook County, Illinois, enters closed session for the purpose of considering appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, student discipline, purchase, sale, or lease of real property, probable, imminent, or pending litigation, collective negotiations, and school safety.
Second?
Second.
Ms. Sierra?
Yes.
Ms. Towner?
Yes.
Ms. Salas?
Yes.
Mr. Durkin?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.